my belief is that I can't tell you anything. There's no way I can teach you anything. All I can do is create an opportunity in which you might be able to learn for yourself. So I'll make this as interactive as possible, and you should feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go along. I'll be getting you going on some of that too. So I am the Jay Forrester Professor at the Sloan School of Management, and it's a privilege to have some of my former students here. In addition, besides you, we have Frederick Johnson. And anybody else here who's an alum of the Sloan School? Just two. Okay. Well, my field is called system dynamics. And what I do is I teach and do research to help companies and other organizations develop their systems thinking skills, a theme that I believe is incredibly important today. And I got to tell you that as I go out and I work with the senior leadership of organizations in business all over the world, in government, in sustainability, which is one of my main research areas, people are concerned. What they tell me is, look, it's not just that we've got more problems than ever before, that everything is changing faster than ever before. Everybody knows that. What they tell you is, look, all of this is happening. All of our problems are getting more and more difficult, even though we've never had more tools and more information technology and more analytical frameworks to address these problems. We've never had better tools, but things still seem to be getting more and more difficult. And what's interesting is that the more thoughtful leaders, now they won't say this in public, but they will in a quiet moment when you really build a trusting relationship with them. The more thoughtful leaders will tell you that they wake up at 2 in the morning worried that it's not just that things are getting more difficult despite these tools and methods and analytical frameworks we have, but because of them. So to illustrate this phenomenon, I brought a photograph of one of the senior leaders that I've worked with. And well, here's the poor guy in his office. And I mean, he's just completely squeezed by pressures on all sides. He doesn't know what to do. Can't breathe. Getting claustrophobic. So what do you do in that situation? Well, it's obvious. You've got to take decisive action. Boom! And now things are getting much better, right? He can see out to the side. He can breathe a little better. But as you may suspect, there might be some unanticipated side effects. Now, this is actually quite an interesting picture. I think very realistic. So for one thing, what do you think happens in most organizations to this gentleman right about here, right about now?
He gets promoted.
Absolutely right. He solved the problem. He gets promoted, and you get to sit in the chair just in time for that. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is a second ago I said, well, wait a minute, you know, there might be some unanticipated side effects. But if you think about it for a minute, there's really no such thing as side effects. No such thing. There's just effects. You make decisions, and your decisions have various effects. The ones you thought about in advance, and especially the ones that worked out well for you. Oh, that was my strategy all along. I'm a phenomenally great manager, and you should promote me and give me a big bonus. But everything else, especially things like this that feed back to bite you in the rear end, oh, that was a side effect. That wasn't my fault. That came from out there. Right? How many times have you heard this from your clients? Or perhaps you have a friend who's made such a statement. But there's really no such thing as side effects. You know, when people say these kinds of things, they're trying to protect their reputation. They're trying to persuade you that they're a great manager, and whatever bad outcomes arose, that wasn't their fault. But what they're actually revealing to you is not that. They're actually revealing how narrow and blinkered are their understandings of the world in which they're operating, what we call their mental models. And this leads to the phenomenon of policy resistance. And I'm sure you've seen this. Policy resistance is a situation in which people faced with a challenge implement the best action they can come up with, and it either doesn't work at all, just fails, or more insidiously, it works in the short run, but then the problem comes back. It comes back over there. It comes back later. It comes back in a different form. But it comes back, and it often comes back worse, more virulent than the original problem. This is an extremely common phenomenon, and there are many, many examples in the world of government, in the United States, which I know best, but all over the world. A good example in the United States would be healthcare. We've had decades of attempts to reform the healthcare system to lower per capita costs and improve access to care, and it's not working. We still have the highest healthcare costs in the world and nowhere near the best health for our citizens. 45 million people uninsured. Now this may change under the new bill, although it's being challenged in the court, so it's too soon to say. But 45 million people uninsured, which people from Europe just can't fathom how that's even possible. That means you don't have any health care unless you pay for it out of pocket or get charity. And we have growing epidemics of cancer and cardiovascular disease and obesity and diabetes that are lowering life expectancy. The United States is about 34th in the world in infant mortality and 32nd in the world in life expectancy, even though we spend twice as much per person on health care as any other nation. I can't think of any more important example of this phenomenon of policy resistance. People have tried for decades to solve this problem. It just keeps getting worse. But there are many, many other examples, from antibiotic resistance to pathogens to failed efforts to deregulate our financial markets and mergers and acquisitions, most of which fail and destroy value rather than generating the vaunted synergies that are supposed to create value, and on and on and on. This is not a new idea. People have understood this characteristic of complex systems for literally millennia. Go back to the ancient Greeks who had the myth of the Hydra. So here's a Hydra on an ancient vase from the Greek National Archaeological Museum. And you all remember the myth here, right? The Hydra is this horrible monster, and if you cut off one of its heads, two more grow. That's the idea of policy resistance. So why does this happen? Well, it's because complex systems have all of these attributes that you see here. They're dynamic. Things are changing all the time and on multiple time scales. You can have a bull market that goes on for a decade and crashes in one day. Everything's connected to everything else. There's feedback everywhere. These systems are nonlinear. They self-organize. They're adaptive and evolving. I don't need to go over this. I think most people today are fairly familiar with some of these concepts at least. The problem is that our mental models are not well suited to deal with a world of that kind of complexity. We tend not to see interaction and dynamics. We tend to think in linear, static, open loop frameworks. So let me give you an example. And by the way, mental models really, really matter a lot. So I'll give you another example here before we move on. You know, some people say, well, mental models, you know, oh, nice concept for psychology. Well, folks in the media and communication business understand the importance of psychology, but a lot of people go, it's a parlor trick. It's not a parlor trick. It has huge consequences. Let me give you an example. Here's a couple of folks flying a jumbo jet, and, well, can you see that right there? So the co-pilot leans over to the pilot and says, say, what's a mountain goat doing way up here in a cloud bank? Okay? That's an example of the mental model overriding the data. Now, I'm going to ask you all a question. I don't know what the answer is. Is anybody here a pilot? Anybody here fly their own aircraft, have military or civilian flying experience? No? Well, so I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but in the United States there's an aviation acronym called CFIT, C-F-I-T. Anybody know what it stands for? Yeah. Well, it stands for Controlled Flight into Terrain. Let me say it again, Controlled Flight into Terrain. So, you know, you got to love the acronyms in the aviation business, right? It sounds pretty innocent, but what it is it's exactly this situation. In a CFIT accident, there's nothing wrong with the engines, the airframe, the flight control services, the hydraulics, the avionics, the instruments. There's nothing wrong with the aircraft whatsoever, but the pilots construct a mental model of their position, heading, altitude, ground speed that's just not consistent with the reality, and they will literally fly their aircraft under full control into the side of the mountain or land it in the woods instead of on the runway. Now, flying is very safe. You don't all have to learn how to swim to get back home at the end of this week. But CFIT is the #1 cause of civilian aviation crashes around the world, and it has been for decades. That tells you mental models really matter. So, one of the mental models that I think is most prevalent and most damaging out there is what I call the open loop mental model. So how many times have you seen this image in a proposal that either you've written yourself or that you've been asked to review? Right? So come on, how many times? Millions, right? Everybody here has done it. So this is the standard proposal story for how we're going to solve a problem. First, we figure out what our problem is, we get some data, we evaluate all alternatives, we're going to select a solution, and then we're going to implement the best one. So what's wrong with this? Well, a lot of my students who tend to be cracking wise will say, hey, you're a professor. You've never implemented anything in your life. So that's the problem. And of course I say, and you're going to be a consultant? So that's an important criticism. I got to tell you that most of my research is directly on the topic of implementation, and I'm going to talk about implementation a little bit this morning. But that's important, but it's not the real problem. The real problem here is this imagines that the process of addressing a problem is linear, one way, beginning, middle, end, done. No project in the history of the world has ever gone that way, certainly none of mine. And you all know this, right? There's constant iteration, feedback, having to go back because you didn't get it right the first time. You didn't really uncover the customer's latent needs. You didn't really understand your client's requirements. And you have to go back as you show them what you think is the answer, and they go, that's not what I had in mind at all, and find out what's really going on. Now, unfortunately, most people don't understand the concept of feedback, but this is what I mean. This is the idea that I want to convey to you today. The idea that in complex systems there's continual feedback, iteration, self-creating, self-organizing behavior. And it's the structure of those systems that creates their dynamics. Now the problem is most people don't understand feedback that way. So listen, if one of your close colleagues comes to you at the end of the day and says, boy, I got some really important feedback from my boss today, what do they mean? What does that actually mean? This is a real question. This is the interactive part. So Frederick, I'm your boss. At the end of the day, you go and get your friends and you say, let's go out for a beer because I really got some negative feedback today. What does that really mean?
It means you did something wrong or you're getting...
Yeah, absolutely. It means your boss kicked your butt today for doing something wrong, right? That's not what I mean by feedback. That's an important thing to understand that you've offended your boss in some fashion, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is this. So Dilbert, as usual, gets it right. In the business world, he says, feedback is a business term which refers to the joy of criticizing other people's work. This is one of the few genuine pleasures of your job, so you should milk it for all it's worth. That's what he meant. That's not what I mean. So here's an example, thanks for reviewing my report. It's garbage. That's not what I mean. What I mean is this. Now let me make it a little more formal for you. Right? So a lot of people think the world is open loop like this. That I have my goals, I know what I want. I want more market share, say, for my company, and I'm going to hire you guys to help me with the campaigns to do that. I'm going to make appropriate decisions, and that's going to lead to an improvement in the situation. The environment here is the business environment, although it could include the natural world too. That's not how it works. I cannot know what the right decisions are just by knowing what I want, where I want to be. I also have to know where I am. So I'll give you a very simple example. I'm a bicycle commuter. I ride my bicycle every day from my house to MIT. And every morning as I'm going there, I've got to keep my bicycle on the right-hand side of the path. So how do I do that? So I know I need to keep it on the right-hand side of the path, but knowing that isn't enough. I have to know where I am. I have to have a feedback loop. And you all know how this works from biking or driving. You're constantly making adjustments to the steering direction through the handlebars or the steering wheel to keep your bike headed towards where it needs to be. So if I'm too far to the left, without even having to think about it, I turn the bars to the right and I go back where I need to be. Continual adjustment, continual feedback. That's feedback, not I'm kicking your butt because I didn't like what you did. It's not feedback until you change your behavior based on my having kicked your butt.
Then it's feedback.
Then you've closed the loop. Exactly. Now, if the world was that simple, it would be just as easy to guide your business as it is to ride your bicycle. But it's not. So why? Well, here we are trying to manage the system by monitoring where we are compared to where we want to be. But wait a minute, our mental models are limited and partial, so we don't really understand the whole system in which we're operating. And so some of our decisions feed back in ways we did not anticipate, those so-called side effects. And they usually feed back in ways that are opposite to your intention, undermining your goals. Now, much more interesting, you're not alone. You're not the only actor out there. You've got all the other actors in the system, your customers, your competitors, the suppliers, the financial markets, the regulators, the labor market, all those other actors out there, and they all have their own goals, but we all share the same world. So whenever you pull the world closer to your goals, you're almost certainly pulling it farther away from your competitors' goals. And they're not just going to sit there. They're going to take compensatory action. So for example, you want to gain market share. How can you do it? It's a real question. How do you do it? Right. So the first answer in this room should be a new ad campaign, right? But you may also recommend to your client that they cut their prices, introduce new products more aggressively, maybe buy some of their rivals and buy market share. There's a variety of things you can do. Well, if your competitors were just stones, that would work. But they're not. They have every single one of those options available to them as well. And that will lead to an advertising war or a price war, which might destroy profitability for everybody and not move the market share needle one bit. Now, of course, an advertising war is good for business for you guys, but that's a different question. They're going to react. Now, they also have limited mental models, and that means that some of their decisions are going to create so-called side effects. Now, this is getting a little bit more complicated. But we're not done yet, because wait a minute, here's a couple of variables that are feeding into the system, but are not yet part of the feedback loop structure. That's almost always wrong. So whenever somebody tells you, something affects us, but we have no control over it whatsoever, you want to challenge that assumption. So in this case, it's the goals. It could be anything, but in this case, it's the goals. Well, so many of you, how many of you are actually in a sales position where you have to go out and sell? Great. So do you have a quarterly or monthly or annual quota that you have to hit?
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't have to answer this specifically for you, but if you're a good salesperson and you do a phenomenal job and you absolutely knock your sales out of the park, so you've greatly exceeded your quota this quarter, what is management going to do?
Increase the result.
Of course, they're going to raise the bar and you're going to have to hit a higher quota next quarter. So what that means is the goals are actually part of the feedback system here. Now, of course, all salespeople very quickly learn that they are part of that loop and that they are managing their manager. And of course, what can you do? Now, I won't embarrass anybody, but what people have told me is that they have friends who solve this problem of not getting their quota raised by sandbagging, by taking firm contracts that they've got and withholding them until the end of the reporting period and then putting them in the system. I know none of you have ever done that, but that's one of the things that can happen. What I'm telling you is the general point is you want to challenge the boundaries of your mental models and try to make the things that you might think are just out there and affecting you, but over which you have no control, understand how they actually are changing in response to your actions. Now, to make this even more complicated, there could be long time delays in any one of these links. That's not going to be an easy system to figure out just by intuition what it is that you ought to do. Now, to make this even worse, when we try to challenge people's mental models, they don't like it. You can't go up to someone and say, Frederick, your mental model of this situation is really atrocious. Let me tell you how it really works, and expect that he's going to learn. That's not going to happen. So we have all this complexity out there that people don't recognize, that they don't understand, that they need help with, but you can't tell them. This creates what I call the implementation paradox, and basically what it is the greatest potential you're going to have when you're applying these tools is when you overturn the most deeply embedded mental models that are so deeply embedded people don't even realize that they're models. They just think they know the truth. And if you disagree with them, you're wrong, you're an idiot, you're out to get me, or you're working some private agenda. And if I directly challenge their mental model, they're going to get very defensive. So, what's the solution? Well, I can't tell the answer. Instead, all I can do is create a learning opportunity, create an environment in which the clients, meaning anybody whose thinking and behavior needs to change in order for things to get better, I've got to create an opportunity for them to be an active participant in the modeling process, in the systems thinking process. So that's the philosophy. Let me give you the example for today. I'm going to talk about GM OnStar. So how many of you know what OnStar is? Oh, not so many. That's because they don't have it in Europe quite yet. It's coming. And of course this is not a US audience, but who has a General Motors vehicle? 1, 2, okay, 3. I got to tell you, even when I give this talk in the United States, it's the same 2 or 3 hands. The difference is everybody's heard of OnStar in the United States. 98% of the hands will go up, but only 2 or 3 of the hands will go up when I say who's got a GM vehicle. That's part of the problem. Now, I don't know if you've ever had General Motors or their other affiliate car companies as clients, but this is a tough case. I mean, this company just went bankrupt last year. This company has lost so much market share, it would populate many small countries if they could capture that. I mean, it's just incredible how tough this industry is, and GM being the high cost. And my friends at GM aren't going to like this on the videotape, but quite frankly, they have been the poster child for what's wrong with the American auto industry. Now, it's a great company in many ways. I'm going to show you some terrific work that they've done. But this is a hard case. So the work I'm going to share with you this morning is not my work. It was done by some of my colleagues. So I'm very pleased to be able to share it with you. And it's prize-winning work, as you can see here. Let me tell you about the cast of characters. So Vince Barabba is now retired, but at the time this work was done, he was the head of strategy for all of GM. Now, he's a very interesting guy. He actually had a career in government before coming to GM. He was the director of the United States Census Bureau under 2 different presidents, 1 from each party. That's a highly political job. It's basically similar to your business in the sense that they have to go out every 10 years and count everybody in the country. And by the way, by Supreme Court ruling, they're not allowed to use any sampling techniques. They have to do a direct enumeration for the official census. So this is a very tough job. And then he went to GM, where he found Washington was easy. Chet Huber was the president of OnStar at the time. He came actually from GM's railroad business. And I got to tell you, when OnStar started being the president of OnStar, it's a wholly owned, separate corporate entity owned by General Motors, was not a big deal because he had about 3 employees, one of whom was Fred Cook. Nick Pudar was a student of mine, like Frederick, an alum of the Sloan School, got his MBA in 1990 and was Vince's chief deputy at that time. Jim Smith, another analyst from OnStar, and Mark Page was also a student of mine. He got his PhD under me at the MIT Sloan School, and he's a leading system dynamics consultant. So, what is OnStar? Not that many people raise their hands, so let me tell you a little bit about it real quickly. What it is it's a telematics service offering. So in your OnStar equipped vehicle, you're going to have these 3 buttons up there. The phone button, which gives you hands-free cell phone access and a virtual advisor. The middle button, the OnStar button, if you press that button, by the way, any of you guys with GM vehicles, do you have OnStar in your vehicle? I saw 3 hands come up with GM vehicle owners, right? So do any of you have OnStar in your car? No? Okay. So if you push the middle button, a human being will come on and say, Mr. Johnson, how can I help you today? And they know who you are. They know where you are because there's an integrated GPS that tells them where the car is. They also have access to all the engine diagnostics and vehicle diagnostics, so they can tell you anything you need to know about how your vehicle is performing. And then the last button on the right, of course, is the emergency button. And if you press that, you get somebody instantly who will provide whatever emergency assistance you might require. It also has what's called automatic crash response. Automatic crash response, if your vehicle is in an accident, either if the airbags go off or if there's a rollover or any large acceleration from any direction, there's accelerometer chips in the system, it will automatically place a call to the OnStar command center where specially trained operators in the call center who staff the emergency desk will answer that call immediately, and they'll come on, and I'm just going to pick on you, Frederick, because you were my student, say, Mr. Johnson, there's been an accident, are you okay? And if you say, no, we need help, or if you don't answer, they can get emergency services to you, and they can do it faster than any other way. And there's two reasons for that. The first reason is your cell phone could be God knows where after an accident, and you may be in no condition to find it. It's probably not within your reach because it flew out of your hands or out of the cup holder you put it in, and it's probably broken, but you might be unconscious or injured as well. So that's one reason. Your cell phone isn't going to be helpful to you. The second reason is, in the United States, if you call 911 from your cell phone, even though there's a GPS chip in your phone, that call is probably not going to go to the emergency responders that are closest to you. It's going to go somewhere else. I actually had to do this, not from my car, but there was a telephone wiring pole that fell down near my house one morning while I was riding my bicycle, and I called 911, and the call went to the state police, not my town's police. So OnStar solves that problem. They get the call, and they know where you are through the GPS. So what they do is they know exactly who the right first responders are based on where you are, and they call them. And then they can conference you in with them, and they can tell you what to do, and you can tell them what help you need. I'm diabetic, I just had a seizure, or I'm bleeding, or whatever it is. This is a map of the Chicago area, and each one of those little boundaries is a separate PSAP, Public Service Access Point. That is a fire station or an EMT station where there is an ambulance and help for you, and you got to call the right one. In many places, like Chicago, they are not allowed to cross over the other boundaries unless they're asked. So if your call goes to the wrong one, when you can see that's easy to happen here, it's going to delay assistance to you. And what OnStar does is it gets you that help right away. Furthermore, they know where you are. Very often your car might have rolled off the road and down an embankment. This has actually happened and cannot be seen from the highway. So the ambulance goes up and down the road and they don't know where you are. Well, with OnStar, they know exactly where the car is. They can direct them exactly the right space, and remotely they can flash the lights and honk the horn so you can be found quickly. So safety and security are a huge aspect of the features of this system, but there are many others, and you can see some of them here. I know it's a little hard to read, but these are all the services that you get in the basic plan, which is quite inexpensive. So crash response, emergency services, vehicle diagnostics. You hear a funny noise or the engine light comes on, and you can call OnStar, push the button. They'll upload all the diagnostics, and they'll tell you whether it's a real problem, whether you just need to bring it into the service place next time you have the opportunity, or whether it's really not a big problem at all, and you can keep driving to where you're going. Hands-free calling from inside the car, turn-by-turn navigation, stolen vehicle assistance. They know where your car is through the GPS, so your car gets jacked, they know where it is, and they can then direct the police to find it. They can remotely unlock your doors. Now, how many of you have ever locked yourself out of your car? Frederick has. So, you know, a few of you, right? So you call them on your pocket phone and give them your password, and they'll unlock your car doors for you. If you've lost your car, for example, at the football game, and you don't remember where it's parked, they can flash the lights and honk the horn and find your car for you, etc. Roadside assistance, crisis assist, etc. And if you get the the higher grade plan, you've got concierge services, so you can push the button and ask them for any kind of assistance you want. So a sales representative coming into a town late at night, they didn't expect to be there, they can push the button and say, I need a hotel for the night. They will book it for you. And by the way, when they do that, they get a commission from the hotel for doing that. And then they'll make a reservation for you at the restaurant of your choice. Oh, I'd love to have Italian tonight, or I'd love to have French food, or whatever it is. Or where's the nearest Wendy's, whatever you want. And they'll tell you where it is. So there's a variety of other services that are out there that are very interesting, including variable rate insurance, which because they know where you are and how much you're driving, if you're willing to give them that information, and you don't have to, but if you're willing to give them how many miles you drive every month, that's all. Not when you're driving, not where you're driving, not how fast you're cornering, just how many miles you drive every month. They can give you a huge discount on your insurance. Stolen vehicle slowdown. If your car is stolen, instead of that high-speed chase that's captured by the helicopters in Los Angeles and is the entertainment for millions of people on television, and which, to be serious for a minute, causes a lot of fatalities, either because the thief is hitting civilians and pedestrians, or the police do. Now that doesn't need to happen. What happens instead is they identify the stolen vehicle that's involved in a high-speed chase. The police will call OnStar in with the license plate. OnStar will flash the side parking lights so they know it's the correct vehicle. And then you just disable the throttle. All the other controls work. Brakes work, steering works. It just doesn't go. It just cruises gently to it, glides to a stop, and those people are arrested. It's a phenomenally great thing. Then they can remotely block the ignition so the car can't be started up again. You can download your destination on your home computer onto Google Maps, and then it ports over automatically to the vehicle, preloaded. You can control your Chevy Volt through your smartphone, and there's a lot of new services coming along. So it's a phenomenal system, and extremely expensive to develop and maintain. It costs a lot of money to create that database. They have to update it 4 times a year because the country keeps changing. And it's a very expensive service to be able to provide. In addition, here's the command center. This is in the Renaissance Center in Detroit, GM headquarters. I've been there. It looks very much like the command centers you'll see in the Pentagon or FEMA. And they're monitoring everything that's going on in the country, what's happening with the system, what the news is, where are there weather disasters or wildfires or whatever's going on. And they can actually proactively alert OnStar drivers that there's a hazard where they are and they should avoid it. This is all very, very expensive to do.